My guest today has over 30 years' experience in the voiceover industry working on games, music, and television. He has worked on key titles for Activision such as MechWarrior 2, Asteroids, and Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Much more recently, he has set up his own direction company for voiceover, music, and TV, and has worked on a number of key titles going forward. However, the reason he's here today is because he's also the voice director for Shenmue 3. My guest today is Bill Black. Welcome to the dojo, Bill. How are you on this very hot Wednesday in the UK?
Well, greetings from West Hollywood, California. I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. I'm pleased I finally got you on the show. This is an interview I've been waiting to get done for quite a while since we've been talking for a few weeks. And I know you've moved, etc. But I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this one. So, are you ready?
I'm ready when you are.
Super. So my first question is one that I do with everybody that get on the show is, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about your career, sort of how you came into the voiceover industry and how you became a voice director.
Well, it's an interesting question. It was not intentional. I worked in the music industry and in the technical side of the music industry, which back in the late 1980s was very strong into the 80s computer music. And I had a knack for Atari computers and Cubase. And through my knowledge of that, I ended up working at Steinberg Soft und Hardware GmbH, but I worked in the US office. And I was originally contacted by Activision Studios back in the late 80s, early 90s on how to get their music files to play properly without all these glitches. And oddly, through that, they led me into the work doing sound effects design and general audio work because they felt, well, he just knows audio, he could work in video games. And unbeknownst to me, I started teaching myself how to do sound design through games. And then as an engineer, I was recording dialogue for video games. And at one point, I think around 95, 96, the game producer said, hey, look, you can't just record him. You've got to, get a good performance out of him. And lo and behold, I became a dialogue director. But actually, through the years, I came to produce dialogue and hired other directors. I watched how other directors work, and I liked a lot of their work. And others, I thought, nah, it's just, come on, you're spending all your time talking. You're not supposed to be talking. The actor is. And I eventually segued into doing VO directing. By about 1997, 98, I was just doing all my own productions pretty much. And within that area, the same company said, look, we've got these, you've done this nice mix for the English movie, but now we've recorded it in French and Italian, German and Spanish, Korean, Japanese. So can you come back and remix the video games and put the foreign language in, which got me into the localization area, which is a whole subworld of video games unto itself. And that's I know that's a long answer to the question, but that's basically how I got into it.
No, I like the long answer because I think the fans would like that sort of background. I certainly do. So as you sort of become more sort of involved in the industry, can you sort of talk me through some favorite projects, favorite actors or characters that you've worked with in your time?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a lot of fun. Mech Warrior 2 Clan Ghost Bear is my most memorable because that is technically the first video game that I really directed. And a few others that stand out were I was the producer, but I also did some directing on Neverwinter Nights. And I love the main character, Arabeth. I'll never forget that. It took months to record. I did casting for World of Warcraft, the Burning Crusade, and many other things in their franchise. Uh, some of my favorite characters came out of Lineage 2 Revolution, the original PC version I did, because I cast and directed the game, but it was a made up language. There is no English, no definitive language. They created their own, that harkens to like way back when they created Klingon, for example. And I found that really interesting. Um, trying to think. Civilization 3 Call to Power. That was good fun because of just the epic title in and of itself. Let's see. More recently, Grand Chase, Dimensional Chaser was hilarious. Brand new characters from scratch. It was originally done in Korean, but they, did a script for the US, and I absolutely love some of the characters, especially the one that wore a duck on his head. I can't remember, but it was incredible. Um, and an interesting thing came up, not in the video game area, but because of my sound design and music background. My good friend Paul came to me and said, "Look, I've made a few passes at this, and I'm not getting it, and I'm buried in work." He says, "Can you just quickly do the theme that opens and closes the Tokyo Stock Exchange?" And I was, as you English say, gobsmacked. And I created the sound effect in I think 2000 that opens and closes the Tokyo Stock Exchange. And then my friend Paul, polished it up and went and did the mix. But I actually created that with him. That was good fun. At that same year, again, it wasn't in the game genre, but I worked with a friend of mine, Jafar, on a very interesting, ahead of its time animation. I did the sound design called Gina and TL. And I didn't know it for years later, but we won a Sundance Film Festival pick in 2001. I mean, it's a great honor. Nobody told me. And somebody came to me and said, that thing you did that got a Sundance? And I go, really? And I looked it up on the internet, and they're absolutely right. I did casting on Delta Force Black Hawk Down. I thought that was cool because I'm not generally a first person shooter in the world of directing, definitely a player. That's another one that comes to mind. Needless to say, I think probably Bravely Default, Flying Fairy, that was a really enjoyable game to cast and direct, as well as Lineage 2 Revolution, the mobile version that came out some 10 years later. The guys in Korea said, you got to get the original guy who directed it. And they tracked me down. And so I got to do the L2R for the, I don't know the devices it came out on, but it became a mobile game. I think it was Android and iOS. Those are the ones that just off the top of my head come to mind. I'm sure there's others that have a lot of meaning to other people, but that one was particularly enjoyable of those ones I mentioned.
Brilliant. And it sounds like you worked across a breadth of genres, titles, and also between music, games, and the Tokyo Stock Exchange one. That's a really cool one. Call me sad for liking it that much, but I think it's a really cool claim to fame.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's on my website too, the film and all that. I don't know if they still use it. My friend Paul was in Tokyo, and he went and listened, and he says they still play it, and that was at least 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. I've been to Tokyo in the last few years at least 3 times, and I've never gotten over to the exchange because I have other things more interesting to do than go to the Nikkei. But yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, anybody can see it. It's on my website.
Excellent. And speaking of Japan, obviously you were the voice director of a very well-known franchise, as my community would say, Shenmue 3. But I want to take it back a little bit. When did you first sort of come across Shenmue as a franchise? Did you play it in the original Dreamcast days, or did you pick it up later on?
Well, I had a friend of mine who was a fanatic, played it on Dreamcast, and I'd heard about it. And it's really a cult game, which I think is very cool. I think I almost have more respect for cult movies and games sometimes than the mainstream ones. But to answer your question, no, I did not play it when it came out. I didn't have a Dreamcast. I had a PlayStation 1. That's really was what I was onto. And I actually had an Atari Jaguar that was a kind of an ill-fated game console too. I played that one as a predecessor to getting my PS1. So I heard about the franchise, or I should say, I started getting interested in it when it seemed to be coming across originally just for my opinion, to give my written opinion on, how to go about doing it. I ended up purchasing the PlayStation port, so I have Shenmue 1 and 2 on my PS4, and that's the first time I actually started playing it.
And how did you find the games when you actually got into playing them?
Well, they were clearly, I don't want to say dated in a negative sense, but they were they were very much of their generation and of that style. It was really interesting, And I had become accustomed to it because early in the computer days, I had played the text only video games. You know, you see a key on a table, that type of thing. And I felt like the point where Shenmue 1 and 2 were coming out, where the mindset was the same, but you were actually able to physically interact. So I started playing 1 and 2. My perspective was more to learn the story than maybe the mechanics of the gameplay. And but as far as the mechanics of the gameplay, to this day, I find those forklifts maddening. The forklifts drive me nuts.
And why do they drive you insane, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, because it's like a wall. You can't really move past this point in the game until you learn how to proficiently race a forklift. And there's a story about it. So I had actually gone on about the forklifts, and it's all forgotten. And when I was recording it, this had gotten back to Yu Suzuki. So right in the middle of a session, he just taps my shoulder and says, "Look at this." And he had had the Unreal Engine open with a warehouse full of forklifts. And it's always been a thing with me, Shenmue and the forklifts.
When he showed you that, did it send a shiver down your spine?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, seeing the Shenmue universe in the Unreal Engine, how do you say it? When he had the tools at his disposal to put what was in his head actually on the screen, so you could interact with Shenmue exactly the way he visualized it in his mind, because of the advancements in technology over the last 20 years. That's kind of what was awe-striking, one of the elements that made it awe-striking. But yet it still had its classical nature, and Rohazuki still had a bandage on his cheek.
Yes, very true. It's all that continuity, which I think the fans appreciated quite a lot. I'm sort of coming back a little bit. You mentioned that you were originally came across Shenmue 3 when you were asked for your sort of professional opinion on how to record the voiceover. How did that sort of come about, and then how did it accelerate from being asked for a professional opinion to you actually working on the game itself?
Well, that was a series of people involved. I was just one gear in this machine. I was approached, I worked for a corporation at the time, and they were approached about this because there's a substantial amount of dialogue in all Shenmue series, particularly in 3. And there's actually some reasoning behind that. I'm just going to digress a minute. When Rohazuki replies to anything or asks something, it's a unique sound file. So his legendary "I see" was not recorded once, twice, or 3 times, hundreds and hundreds of times. So each time Rohazuki speaks, it's just like a real person because it's a different physical recording. So that made for a very large game. On top of that, there were a substantial amount of NPC characters, some of them very chatty, and some of them just the brief bits and pieces from the vendors. So this was a large, very high volume dialogue game, very high, as we say in the business, a high line count, a high word count, and a high character count. So the only thing that wasn't high was the budget. And I was approached saying, look, they got to get this thing done for next to nothing. And I looked at the numbers and said, that's impossible. It's just not even realistic. And they came back with some, quote, actors, unquote, in Japan and said, look, they can get these guys real cheap. And I listened to the recordings and I said, yeah, because they're not actors. They're, quote, doing voices. And it's clear and obvious. So after that point, it just kind of disappeared off my desk. I moved on to other things. And at some point, other people had intervened. When I met Ryan Payton, who is such a key factor in the whole Shenmue 3 evolution, he had mentioned a conversation he had with Yu Suzuki about how atrocious the 1 and 2 voiceover was. And it actually has become kind of a joke if you check YouTube. He said actually that Yu was in tears because he had just mocked how garbage it was and why there was absolutely no logical reason to repeat this. I'm paraphrasing what he told me. Always consider Ryan for the source of that info. It ended up that a budget was had, and then I was handed the script and the budget and said, make it so. And that's how I came onto the project.
So, sort of as a follow up to that, is obviously you quite rightly said the budget for Shenmue 3 was constrained across the board, not just for the voiceover, I mean, for the general development as it was a Kickstarter project. So, how did you balance getting top quality or the best quality that you could and the massive amount of dialogue that's in that game?
Well, there were several factors. First of all, I had to find a recording studio that had 2 rooms so I could record simultaneously, because there's no way one person could, in a linear fashion, record the entire thing by the deadline. So I brought on Chris Bevins, a actor, director, singwriter, and writer from Texas who had recently moved to Los Angeles. And I got him involved in dealing with the kind of, he was the vendor guy and took care of so much of the NPC work. And he really just made everything special. He just found as many great actors as he could to do these small parts, so it really stood out. He was well aware of the fact that, the previous iterations of Shenmue just really were lacking in quality. So he was a very major component in being able to get it done on time. So you have 2 directors in 2 studios recording simultaneously 8 to 10 hours a day. That's how we did met the deadline. As far as the budget went, I basically employed actors that could do multiple voices. You could never tell, but they do multiple voices and do a lot of coverage in a short amount of time. Also, I take a tremendous amount of care in casting. That is a large portion of my time in advance of recording. So when the actor's in the studio, there's no surprises. We all know what we're doing, and we just get it done.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And out of interest, how long were you given to record the lines and the dialogue for Shenmue 3?
If I'm not mistaken, and I want to say I did this in 2018. So it's recent as far as release goes, but I actually started working on this in 2018, I believe. But I think we took 4 months to get it done. And that's both of us working together. Chris worked about 3 months, and then I was on my own the last 2. So I think it took 4 months to get it done. I was also doing another game at the same time in working evenings. So it's all kind of a blur.
4 months doesn't sound like a very long time, quite frankly. How, in a normal circumstance, how long would you want for a game with dialogue that large?
I would have preferred 5 to 6 months, with maybe some breaks in the middle to stop and catch up on various things. We didn't have that, so I put together a plan in advance that had to address a couple of directors working on the same script can be very challenging, but Chris really gets it. So we had to deal with that to cram the time together. And we also had another area that was very interesting. And I think I've given you some film where I discuss it. But Shenmue 3, as you know, 1 was Japan, and 2, I believe, was Hong Kong, and 3 was on the mainland. And the characters had proper Chinese names. And Yu Suzuki and team did some amazing research. And one thing that I'm a real stickler for is pronunciation. So another element that really helped myself and Chris is we had someone who could look at the Chinese names spelled out in Roman letters, Pinyin, I think it's called. I'm not certain on that, and gave us the pronunciation for every single character. So we had not only the correct pronunciation, but we also had continuity throughout the game. So there's a recording of Zhao, and if the name is Zhao, every actor has played the audio sample Zhao and says it accordingly. That was another thing that cut down on time, so that we weren't constantly going, how do I pronounce this? Because Chinese is very much like French. It sounds nothing like it's spelled. And that was another thing that helped us in managing time.
Excellent. And I note from the, and just for the guys who are listening, Bill's very kindly given us some footage behind the scenes. And there's one bit of footage where Corey is being taught how to say a wow, if I remember correctly. And you're going through each syllable to make it sound the same each time. And I imagine that's the sort of process that the actors would have been following to make sure you're getting that continuity. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. We had files of a person pronouncing the name, and that was the defining file. So the engineer would pull up the recording, the little wave clip that says, "This is how you say zhou, zhao," and then they'd hear it, and the actor would parrot it, and the pronunciation would have continuity throughout the entire game.
Fantastic. Thank you for that detail on that. You've mentioned casting again, which obviously helped you meet the deadline. You got some voice actors in that could do multiple voices, so it saved you time, budget, etc. Can you talk me through sort of your casting process for Shenmue 3? Obviously, we had Brianna came in for Shenhua. We had Greg Chung come in as Ren, replacing Eric Kelso. Could you sort of talk me through the casting process for those characters?
Yes, I was a bit on my own. The company I worked for at the time was based in the Seattle area, so I was a remote worker before it was cool, I've had decades of experience. So once it was determined what we were going to cast and have the developer listen to, in other words, sign off on this actor for this character versus the other characters, is you're on your own. Pick whoever you think is best. That's where we divided it up. So I requested reads from actors that I knew were well suited for that role. So I would go through and I would select a character, and then I would select some sample lines that covered what I like to call the arc of the character. I'll give you an example. The character cries and is despondent in this part, and the character is silly in another part, and the character is dead serious. So I try to get a sample of the arc of the character as that character develops and emotes a certain way. Then I would pick actors I feel were great for the role. And I would ask them to read, and then we would run through them with the development team, and they'd say, "Oh, that guy's perfect for the role." Um, I did that for every role except what is this crazy little golem-like character? It skips.
Chai.
Yeah, Chai. I just said, "There's one guy who's going to do it. Trust me," and they all agreed. He was brilliant. Lucien Dodge. As soon as I gave him the role, he says, "Oh yeah, I know why you gave me that one, Bill. Yeah, it was great." But that's how we did the primary characters. And then the secondary and tertiary were selected by myself and Bevins, because we both had our eyes on certain actors and we had to divvy them up. It's like, "Oh no, you can't use that one. I'm using that one for this." "Oh, okay. Well, be sure you don't hire this person because I've got them for these role and that role." So we kind of had a lot of preparation in hand. So we had to cover the casting in advance, primary, secondary, and tertiary roles. Had to make sure that me and Bevins didn't double up on the same person because we know a lot of the same actors. And then I just went through and had to think and picked people that I thought were terrific. And then there was a few actors that you never saw me here, but I got to be in Shenmue 3. So I had a few voiceover celebrities you'll never find out here that just wanted to be in the game because they were such huge fans when, 20 years back when it was on Dreamcast. So that kind of was a potpourri of how we did it. And then it was getting down to getting them in. Now, obviously, it was simple. Clearly, Corey was going to reprise this role as Ro, and I had been talking to him months in advance. He was quite ready to go. And then Shenhua was very important. Brianna got the role. She was magic. She was Shenhua. As soon as I heard her read, I knew, oh, she's just got that right. She's had that right thing. You really can't put it in words. It's chemistry and it's magic. And you could see it when you see Shenhua and Ro speaking, say, in some of the cinematics, immediately, there's no question she is Shenhua. And that's really how I came about doing it. There's a couple other factors. First of all, I was unaware of the fact that certain characters outside of Rohazuki had become near and dear to the players. And I was also told, "Look, you're a Hollywood pro. You've been doing this for decades. I want professional actors. You got to get me pros." And I said, "Of course, that's all I'll use in the game." And that's how we segue into the Eric Kelso thing. I was really unaware that he was even in the game. I was just told that the people who did Shenmue 1 and 2 were just people, anybody who could speak English with a pulse anywhere near Tokyo got to come in and read. So later on, I understood that that was quite a bit of a disappointment for some of the fans on why I didn't use him specifically. Well, I was instructed to use LA-based actors, and I also was unaware of the significance he as an actor had contributed to the original 1 and 2 franchise. So that's a question I get often. Frankly, I didn't even know. But then again, this game didn't have a lot of time.
No. I mean, 4 months, as you say, to record the pile of dialogue that you had is crazy in itself. The Eric question is always one that's come up for a long time since I think it was 2019. There was a leak in Walmart, believe it or not. A small clip came up of Ren tapping Ryo on the shoulder, and Shenmue fans, being Shenmue fans, clocked that it wasn't Eric Kelso. I think we'd assumed it wouldn't be anyway. And I think that's where people first got a taste of it. And Greg Chun did a really good job as Ren. I thought he captured Ren's sort of arrogance, cockiness, that sort of bravado really nicely. I really enjoyed Greg's performance there, but I know there were certain fans that were disappointed not to see Eric come back. And is it fair to say you've had quite a bit of criticism for it?
I've had exceptional amounts of criticism. One of the things too is because I've been asked, and I've answered the question several ways. There are really three factors. One, I had no clue who this guy was. Wasn't even on my radar. Number two, I was told use professionals that work in Los Angeles, and a third element too is, and this one a lot of people just really think I'm terrible for having this attitude, but you can't be a deep sea diver in Kansas. If you want to be a professional voice actor, this is where it's done. It's not done. It's not done to this degree outside of the greater Los Angeles area or the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's pretty much, for U.S. English, that's pretty much the ground that it's done on. So he was never on my radar. And I'm sorry if people didn't appreciate it. I hope people can, I should say, I hope people can appreciate the fact this just never even was discussed. It was a blank role, fill all the roles except obviously Corey's going to do Roja again. And I heard about it after the project was completed.
Yeah, that's fair. And I appreciate your honesty, Bill, of sort of talking us through that, because I think the biggest thing I think in the community was people didn't understand why, but I think your answer covers that very, very nicely. So thank you for your honest sort of feedback on that. My next question sort of leads into recording itself. Can you talk me through the recording process of Shenmue 3 itself, how lines were recorded? For example, was it one line, one take? Were Ryo and Shenhua's lines done together? So Corey and Brianna, how was it all done?
Well, first of all, we kind of divided up the script. We did a sort in Excel, so you kind of get an idea of how many lines each person has. You need that if for another reason than to know how many hours you're going to need to use them. So we pretty much broke it down by obviously Uro Hazuki, followed by Shenhua, had the majority of lines, and then the other primary characters. And once that was done, the challenge was the pronunciation. I discussed that in an earlier question. We had to get that right. I'm a real stickler. So the assistant was physically in all recording sessions and spoke the Chinese and could voice the correct pronunciation. And once we had that worked out, we looked at the cinematics. We looked at the video that we call it lip flap. In other words, when it needs to be dubbed in time with the animation. So we cut it down to that. And at that point, we looked at who was in these videos and who would be great to have together. It's a lot to do with time and financial budget. The concept is ensemble recording. There's a lot of great animation that's all recorded at once with all the actors in the same studio with their own mics and headphones doing their lines. And it's terrific because they can interact with each other. Kind of harkens back to Shakespeare when you're on the original on stage performance where you get to see a play and you get to see the characters act off of each other. But due to even the line count, you have to have an actor. Something takes 4 hours to record, and the one actor has only 7 lines. You don't want to have them there for 4 hours for that short 7 lines. So ensemble recording, it was really not an option for us due to time and financial budget. However, in certain scenes, I felt it so critical. So I brought in Rohazuki's character, Corey, and Shenhua's character, Brianna, and had them record their lines together in the studio because it just added that extra bit of magic. Outside of that, people do it on their own. And this is one of the remarkable things about voice actors. You can listen to two characters, talk to each other, performed by 2 different actors. And it sounds like they were both in the room talking at the same time. That's part of their magic. That's part of their craft, their skill, their incredible ability to carry on a one-sided conversation. And then the other person 3 weeks later may come in and record their other half of the conversation. But when you're seeing it in context of the performance, you'd never have a clue. And that I really have to commend the skill and the talent and craft of the voice actors, because that's what they do. And it's really amazing. So we had a mixture of ensemble recording, solo recording, and dubbing to picture recording, as well as just reading lines. You asked me one line, one take. I do have a technique. I really think I well, a director that I worked with in the 90s once said, look, if you can't decide which take in the studio while you're directing, you're not ready to direct yet. So if it takes 10 reads, I do 10 reads. If they get it in the first one, I move on to the next line, because if it's right, it's right. And that's how I pretty much recorded it. And that's, of course, approach was very helpful when considering how little time we had to create this and maintain quality. So I'd rather have one quality take than just a ton of stuff to sift through that's just mediocre because we're just trying to get all these alternate versions and whatnot.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And obviously now in the digital age, with scripts as large as they are, you can change things on the fly. So were you able to change any little bits in the script as you were going along? Say like a translation wasn't quite there, or there was certain language that wouldn't have been used back in the 80s. Were you able to do all of that as well, so on the fly and recording?
Absolutely. I do that with most every game. Oftentimes there's just grammatical mistakes. Sometimes there's translator mistakes where they leave the source language in there and suddenly a Japanese word pops up. In the case of Shenmue, that was typical. It's typical of most games. And there's a actor I work with named Mona Marshall. She's on the TV show South Park. She says, Bill, we don't all start out as writers, but we all eventually become writers. One of the things that stuck out in Shenmue to me was the story, as all the fans know, takes place in the late 1980s. And it's not, Shenmue 3 is not 20 years later. It happens after Shenmue 2. And as a result, you have to have the parlance of the times. And there were a few places that perhaps a younger translator that wasn't around in the 80s realized that didn't exist. One of the things was, that's so emo. And it's like, well, yeah, exactly. But My Chemical Romance wasn't around in 1987. So I had to go back and find out, well, what would be similar to that back then. Oh, I remember New Romantic. That was the music that was, that would be the musical analogy that would have made sense back then. And so there were some things that just that didn't exist in the 80s that we had to go back in, or something, and make it sound some of the slang a little more 80s. Because there was slang of the 80s, and then slang like anything else progresses. So we did quite a bit of that too. And that was really fun. And of course, it was demonstrative of my age as well, because I knew the 80s far too well.
There's nothing wrong with knowing the 80s so well, to be fair. I was born in the 80s, but hey ho. One of the biggest compliments I can pay testament to, actually, with the Shenmue 3 voiceover is it fits like a glove. It doesn't feel like it was recorded 20 years later. So that's, congratulations and thank you for getting that sort of Shenmue feel to it, because I think that's one thing we can all agree on, that it fits perfectly. Within the brief, were you given certain instructions as to how they wanted it, so it gave some continuity from Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2, and then taking that into Shenmue 3 itself?
There wasn't a lot. Obviously, I asked everybody for any suggestions that I could have possibly gotten. I would have preferred to spend a week with Ryan if I could have, but that wasn't an option. So I did the best I could to play the game and to read what I could. I also think that the crafting of the script in the source language Japanese, it flowed downstream to keep it there. So I think I have to give an awful lot of credit to the original writer in the source language, and then again to the people who adapted it and localized it into English. I think that was an instrumental part in keeping it Shenmue, if you please. That was really a lot of it. And then the rest of it was, obviously with Corey Marshall is Ro Hazuki, in him being there just kind of gave you that warmth and kind of tied it all together. And I think a lot of people fed off of his performance and felt like, okay, that's the main guy that I am interacting with. And they kind of mirrored the vibe that he brought to it. That's how I felt it. It worked so well. It's hard to articulate certain creative things because when it works, it works. It's like a beautiful piece of music. I mean, you can sit down and go, well, the violin played that and the bass played that. But it's just sometimes there's just magic in the studio that's difficult to put into language. It's just when you get a very passionate, very experienced voice actors together with a product that they love, it just pours out of them. And that's really what happened with Shenmue 3.
So talking about the recording process, do you have any favorite moments from recording, like any funny moments, funny stories?
Oh, we had some great fun. The most magic was the first 2 days when Yu Suzuki was in the room. That's pure magic. Having the guy sitting next to you, that this was a concept in his head decades ago, and it became 3 games. So that's pretty awe inspiring right off the bat. And he was very very helpful. He was chatty at times, quiet at other times, and having him actually showing us. He had Shenmue 3 in Unreal with a game controller on his computer. In fact, I sent you some footage of you and Corey actually playing the game, and being able to see it and talk to you about it. I had a translator there. I'm not. I speak some Japanese, but I'm not fluent. We had a translator there, so we were really able to just to really see how he felt about it. So the first day we had Shenhua and Ro in the studio doing cinematics. That was probably the most magical thing. There was some hilarious times as well because I'd have poor Corey in there, and sometimes he had like 17 pages of "I see," and can you tell me where I could find some 50-year-old wine? And it'd be like just dozens of the same lines over and over again. I thought that was kind of funny. So we got a little tired at times. After we finished a chapter, we'd play another one bites the dust. And I remember the engineer was wacky. There's a thing where he talks about where you go fishing, right? And he talks about the fishing wharf, which is obviously
Yes.
right. So it's a wharf where you go fishing. So every time he said fishing wharf, he'd put a picture he found of a fisherman with Star Trek's Worf's head on it on the screen, and Corey would bust up. Oh, it was really something. One of my favorite things was recording Chai with Lucy, and that was absolutely fun. Listening, I wasn't at the session because I was doing other things, other parts of the game, but having the hot dog vendor, Bill Butts, was just hilarious. I really enjoyed that. I should send you video. I've got Corey and Bill dancing in the studio. So there was just the whole thing was really enjoyable. But off the top of my head, that's all I can come up with at the moment, Matt. But there was a lot of fun moments and a lot of tiring moments, but we got it done.
I can imagine, especially over 4 months, cranking out 8 to 10 hour days. You certainly deserve a beer or beverage of your choice after that. So, what's it like working with Yu Suzuki? And I know you said he was only with you for a few days. How long would you have wanted him to be around if it was possible?
All 4 months.
Yeah,
But that's
4 months in LA. Why not?
Yeah, why not? It was absolutely impractical. But having him there, first of all, just the kind of the emotional boost of having the guy who created Shenmue sitting next to you, talking to you. I was able to speak to him in Japanese, and I remember when he says, I gotta go," and I go "Doshite," which is why, and the whole room busted out laughing because I was sad he had to go. But I really enjoyed working with him. It was great watching him play the game that he created before it was released. It's really hard to say. I got to explain to him my approach on how it was done. He got to meet. Obviously, he got to see Corey again. He got to meet Brianna and a few of the other primary actors during his time there. He got to see our process and how it was done. He got to read along in Japanese as we did the English. So I think that was really, that was the spark. He added the spark that started the fire that led to these 4 months of just relentless work to try to put Shenmue 3, to make it what it turned out, got what we wanted. We felt like it was a continuation, that it wasn't 20 years later, it was just like the next production in line. And having him there was really the catalyst for that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And for fans who were probably following some of this on Twitter back when recording was happening, a tweet came out. I think it was off Yu Suzuki's Twitter. I have to check it and remember. But there's a photo of yourself, Yu Suzuki, and Corey, fists up in the studio, looking ready to go. I think that just sort of sums up a little bit of that magic for me, which is really nice to see. And obviously, you've given us some really nice behind the scenes footage, which for our YouTube listeners, you will be seeing some of it through this podcast. And also I'm going to attach it to the end of this as well, so you can hear and see and everything that was going on behind the scenes, because it's a really nice insight to how things were done. So I want to move on to sort of post-production, post-recording. You've wrapped on the voiceover, you're done, and the 4 months are up. What was your involvement after the recording had finished?
The During the recording, and that's a really difficult situation. During the recording, I sent the material out. The corporation I work for had some exceptional editors, primarily in Europe, that were supposed to be doing the editing on this, but they in turn sent it to an extremely good-hearted but horribly inexperienced and inadequate editor. And there was a substantial amount of mistakes made. And to this day, some great material never ended up in the game. Incorrect material was sent instead. And I spent weeks trying to sort this mess out because they just mislabeled a substantial amount of the material. But that was a decision made by the company I was employed by that really doesn't understand the importance of post-production. So that was a difficult part. That was probably the most negative element of the game for me. And I got as much of it as I could going the way I wanted it. But there were some great performances that never made it into the game, and the incorrect actor was used in the game. So there was early on in the production, two of the actors that I work with regularly said they were huge Shenmue fans, and they said, did you hear this? And I said, no, that's being recorded in the other studio. So on Super Bowl Sunday, the three of us sat down with a bunch of pizza, and we listened to every single performance of every actor without knowing who it was. And we weeded out stuff that we thought was not fitting for Shenmue. And we were able to remove, replace, and re-record most all of it. But a few bad bits made their way into the game, but there's little I can do about it now. So that's kind of that's kind of a negative story, but that's really what happened afterwards. All the primary and secondary characters were fine, but some of the tertiary characters, unfortunately, I couldn't get that material into the game.
Which is a shame, but I don't think it impacts the quality too much. But like you say, when you're going through that effort of identifying the ones that aren't quite right, re-recording it, sending it off, and it's not in the game, I would be frustrated with it if I was in your shoes directing that. I would definitely be a very frustrated man. And sort of, I know this is going back. Do you remember roughly how much was re-recorded, or would it just be a sort of stab in the dark at an answer?
No. I think actually, I think we came up with almost 30 characters we re-recorded. We just didn't like them. They weren't good.
Wow.
Yeah. They just weren't. They weren't actors. See, both of the people that I sat down, I'm a director, and I sat down with a veteran actor, two veteran actors. One of them was a huge Shenmue fan and had played. So, in other words, the ears that were on this were very serious, and we just said, "This is garbage. We can't have this in the game." And so we cut it out and replaced them. And then a couple of them made their way through due to incompetent editing, and that's again a sad situation. But we did the best we could.
No, absolutely, and 30 characters is quite a substantial amount. So, the effort that you've gone to is really something else. Is above and beyond, especially when you consider that you were on a very, very strict budget to begin with. So, thank you for sort of giving us an insight into the post production and how that worked. So, sort of going into Shenmue 4, possibly if we get it. I'm touching wood as I say it. that we hopefully do get it. Would you like to work on Shenmue 4, and B, what would you do differently if you were to come back and work on Shenmue 4?
Well, if there is a Shenmue 4, I absolutely would love to do it. Um, and if that happened, having full control of the production would allow me to do better time budgeting and more pre-production, because I would have no other duties distracting me, as I'm no longer an employee of a corporation. I just do games on my own now. That would be the difference. And another thing that would be really great is, and I know there's people who could facilitate me, yourself and Adam Korolek and Ryan and others. I'd love to hear anything, any input from the people who made Shenmue, who it was, the fan base, the user base, the players. That would be a really good place to start for input.
Brilliant. And yeah, if that ever happened, I'd be more than happy to do it, but I'm biased. But so what if you were asking the fans for input, what would you be looking for? What sort of input would you want from them?
Well, there's input that I would want. I mean, input needs to go to the game designers and game developers to, as far as the gameplay element goes. But from the voiceover and character development, it would be very interesting to see what what they're looking for, what they like, what they dislike, things of that nature. I mean, we got a good idea of what they thought of 1 and 2. Now, after digesting 3, would love to know what you think of that. Maybe they want to have more development done on some of the tertiary characters. Maybe they want Eric Kelso back. I don't really know. It's just really a matter of gathering that data and seeing what people's feelings are on that.
Would you be having Eric Kelso on speed dial?
Oh, absolutely. He'll never forgive me, though. I've never met him. Somebody actually went out and re-recorded a video from Shenmue 3 with him dubbing the voiceover. He should get a hold of me one day. We should have an email exchange. I assume he's still in Tokyo.
He is. He's still in Tokyo. Person who did it is the other half of the dojo ownership, with a few other fans who know Eric personally, and sort of got him to do it because he was quite happy to give it a go, and he seemed to quite enjoy it. So he's still in Tokyo, and I think he's still active, voice recording here and there.
That's good to know, and hopefully he'll reach out and contact me one of these days. But and I'd just love to have an exchange with him. So if you're listening, Eric, gomenasai. 私の日本語は完璧ではありません。そして英語でお願いします。There we go.
And for the non-fluent Japanese listeners, what does that mean?
I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry. My Japanese isn't good, so contact me in English.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thanks for that, Bill. Much appreciated. So, obviously, you're not just the Shenmue voice director. You've done a huge amount of projects over the years. Can you talk to me about some other projects you've been working on more recently, or during Shenmue 3's recording itself?
I just finished a game, and I can talk about it. It's called Undawn. It's every actor and director's dream, because it's a zombie game. And a zombie game is on the bucket list of I don't know how many people. So I finally cast and directed a zombie game. I actually did it in segments. So it started I think in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And I worked on it when I was in Marina Del Rey. I worked on it when I was in Las Vegas. And I just finished it up back here in West Hollywood just some weeks ago. And they've announced it on the internet. So I know it's okay to talk about it. That's my most recent one. I'm trying to think of the last ones I've done. I worked on Grand Chase, Dimensional Chaser, which really was a funny game. And the others, I'm afraid they're just not ripe to discuss.
No, that's fine. But I'm sure there's plenty more games that you've worked on in the pipeline, shall we say. So I'll move on so I don't get you in trouble more than anything else.
Thank you for that. NDA.
Yeah, NDAs, the joys of NDAs. Sort of moving into my final two questions, and one I'd like to ask is for any sort of budding voice actors or directors out there, what advice would you give anybody wanting to get into either the voice acting or voice directing industry?
Well, I would tell them what I mostly tell people. If first of all, remember that voice acting is an element of being an actor. First and foremost, if you have the talent, and you want to learn it, you are an actor. You don't do voices, you create characters. And if you're interested in it, take classes, read Sanford Meisner's book, um, learn the fact that acting can involve many things. It can be on screen, it can be animation, it can be anime, it can be video games, it can be even commercial voiceover. There's a it's a category with a lot of subcategories. So if you have talent and you can get into the business, don't be discouraged. It takes time. It's worth it. A lot of people want to be actors, and it's a very crowded field. But if you have the talent, you can do it. If you have the talent and the patience, you can do it. Once you get somewhere, still, you can't be a deep sea ocean diver in Kansas, and you can't be an actor outside of Los Angeles if you want this to be a full-time profession. Well, maybe Dallas, but you get the general idea. So work on it. Remember, you don't do voices, you create characters. And most important, if you want to be a voice actor, learn how to cold read. If you don't know what that is, your teacher will give that to you.
And what about for sort of budding voice directors who want to do the other, the other side of things, the recording side of things?
Well, I always tell them we're going to need voice actors because me and all the other ones I know are getting old. One of these days we're going to have to call it quits. Here's the best advice I can give anybody who's going to be a director, especially when you're an actor and you move into the role of a director. Remember to be quiet and let the actor act. They're the ones that are getting paid to talk, not us. And that is sounds very simple, but honestly, that will give you, when you cast it right, let that actor go, let that ship sail, and you'll generally always be very pleasantly surprised. Some of the sessions I've done, I've said to the actor, that's not what I've heard, but what you did is even better. And then once they've created that character and delivered that magic, you realize it's really a team effort.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Bill. And then my final question, and I do this to everybody, is do you have a final message for the Shenmue community?
Oh, most definitely. The Shenmue community needs to know that it's you guys that made Shenmue what it is. It's the players, it's the fans, it's the super fans. Those are the ones who made it. It's Ryan, it's Corey, it's Adams, it's Liesel. I'm humbled just to have been associated with this incredible game and the community that supports it. And it was definitely a peak moment in my career that will never be forgotten. But the community that supports it made it what it was, what it is, and what it will be. And it's really Yu Suzuki and the fans that we have to thank for being a part of that.
Thank you, Bill. And from the Shenmue community, I just want to say thank you for doing this interview with me today and taking the time out of your day to do it, and B is also for being a part of the Shenmue community by being the voice director for Shenmue 3. I've always said this to people who come into the community. It doesn't matter whether you're a new person to the community or you've been here for 20 years. You're all a part of this Shenmue family and you're an integral part of it. So I'd like to say thank you for all your work on Shenmue 3 and making it and the voiceover dub as good as it was, considering the challenges that you had in getting that through the door. So thank you for that, Bill. It's on behalf of the community, it's very much appreciated.
Oh, thank you. It was all my pleasure.
Brilliant. And for everybody who is listening to this or watching this on YouTube, stay tuned because Bill has kindly given us some behind the scenes footage, which I'm going to attach to the end of this interview for everybody to watch. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to listen to me. The video is coming up and I will be back with another interview very, very soon.
Everybody always says every Chinese name in correct Chinese, except for a couple things that are uniquely American, Tao, Shaolin, things like that. But we would screw it up. We call it Zhang Fei, but it's Zhang Fei, and I can't say it, but Zoe can pronounce it to the headphones, and then they can imitate. So, taking a picture. I want to go over this with you. I want her to capture on video us going over this for the first time. Make sense? Yeah. It's for the making of behind the scenes. Okay, so one of the things about this game, it's in Japanese. We're doing it in English, but it takes place in China in like 1987. So Zoe speaks Chinese, and one of the things I wanted to avoid was crap American Zhao Bang, and everybody's like, ugh.
Yeah.
So there's tons of them, but we have, if you can see, there it is. Okay, I would say yeah. No, it's meh. Yeah, rhymes with meh. Yeah. Here it's Yu Fang, Yi. I can't even say it. But basically you can see there. And so you see one here, you go, hey guys, we got like, how do we say this one? And then we go up to the top and we check it out. So we get the pronunciation. Plus she can also repeat it to you. And some of them are real challenging.
I'm really good with that, so that'll be super helpful.
Yeah, like
I got
we
you.
have so much trouble. So Zoe can do that. So that was basically it.
Nice.
And then of course the things there, you do a line that's purple, and then up here's the we have some lip sync. We're not so much after the lip sync, we're after the length. So I want to shoot go onto YouTube and hear the voice just for fun. Give me 1 second.
I need to get that pitch up. What the?
Yeah, I think that's what we need, but I thought we'd just look at, there's like a million grabs on there, so we're just going to try an original.
Jim Clark.
No, I got to show you one. Best line. You got to see this one. It's called the best line ever.
And then all 5 of them sung on a single tone for 1.5 seconds in your character voice.
Yeah.
So I have a pre-made file where she does it, and you just back and forth each sound.
Great.
Ah, ah, e. So just mimic her sound and timing it, but it's your character voice. So don't match her pitch.
Yeah,
Even on the
pitch.
singing, don't match it. Whatever is natural for your character voice. Here we go.
A,
A,
E,
E,
U,
U,
E,
E,
O.
O.
A,
I want to hear some.
A,
E,
E,
Oh.
U,
U,
E,
Not a single.
E,
O.
O.
Perfect. Now I'm very confident. We have all that. We're good. Okay, let's get back to the ADR. And just make it longer.
A little longer.
A little longer.
What were we at?
We were at 1.3.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just drag it out.
Yep.
Here we go.
Drag it out.
Here, I'll play it. You'll hear reference. You'll still have her beeps. Here we go.
Did you just say wow? That was my father's name.
Checking it. And no William Shatner. Drag it out. That was my father's name.
いや、それは後からシンクさせるので、あいうえおって取ってもらうと思うんですよ、日本語で。そのデータを元に自動的にシンクするようにします。だから、リップシンクは考えなくていいですよ、本当に。タイムネが合ってる、長さが合ってる。
So, they said in Los Angeles band, and they're going to lip sync it. So right now you don't really have to think too much about lip sync.
Get close.
As long as the length is right, they will match it.
すべてプリレンダーじゃないんです。
They're not pre-rendering it, so yeah, they said the important thing is the length.
The length.
人と弟子にコミュニケーションを取るっていうよりは、ちょっとぶっきらぼうな。
結構淡々と。
喋り方も男の子っぽい、なんとかだわっていう感じじゃなくて。
はい、わかりました。So, there's not like a extended backstory to her, but it's more like her image is that she grew up kind of not in city centers. She grew up in the mountains.
She's urban. She grew up in the mountains.
Yeah, so she talks just to get to the point. She doesn't have any like special expression, like very female, feminine expression. It's just
学校にも行ってない。
she's never been to school. She
Uneducated? You say never been to school?
but she's not stupid. She's just never been to. Like,
She hasn't formally
that
educated.
social situation.
Oh, and by the way, it's 1987 in in China, just so you
And
know.
she was raised by her father, so
Raised by a
the way
father?
she speaks is also, it's not feminine, it's very,
You didn't have the mother feminine influence. The father
ちょっ
raised
と
you.
男の子っ
Good
ぽ
to
い
know.
yeah, so she's kind of a
ボーイッシ
tomboy.
ュな
Little tomboy?
Good to know. These are very helpful.
Yeah, this will get her started.
Yeah, so, and she's not, so since she was raised by her father, she thinks she's just as strong as just as, you know.
Oh, okay. So you're your father's image. You're your father's daughter. You're just as strong as your father was.
She
These
doesn't
are
think
very
she's any
helpful.
Yeah.
weaker than
まあ
boys.
宮崎さんのキャラみたいな
もののけ姫。
いや、ナウシカですよね。
ナウシカとかもののけ姫とかそういう
Have you seen Princess Mononoke or?
No, I have
I
not.
have.
She
Oh,
has.
yeah, so that the main character in Princess Mononoke like that, like
Yes.
she was raised by wolves, so it's kind of a little
だからあ
extreme,
ん
but
まり女の子っぽくならないようにして
not
ちょっ
just
と
not
ボーイ
too
ッシュな
feminine.
Not too feminine.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think that's a good. Does that give you a good place?
I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, she's good.
I
She's
get
good.
it.
I wish I were better at Lucky Dip.